So in this episode, we're going to take you back to something we recorded at Jesus' time. And we've been taking the team through this topic of the hero's journey, which is a really cool topic that is kind of a good framework for understanding your path. We kind of meld it with the masculine journey. And this topic dives into kind of the intersection of that. Chris, will you talk about that a little bit?
Well, just a quick thing. You're right that we did that whole stages of maturity phase on the masculine journey from John Eldredge. But then probably the last year, 2 years, you and I and Christine, and probably mostly you and Christine, have also brought that into to where it wasn't just about masculinity.
Yeah.
Right? And so really kind of said, okay, these thoughts of maturity, of how do we grow into a person, into where like men, women, everything. I thought that was actually really great material. Some of the best stuff we've done.
I'm actually really excited. We have just a kind of a sneak peek. We're going to have Morgan Snyder and Sherry Snyder on an interview in August.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask those questions like, okay, Sherry, where's this going? Because Morgan's really into the masculine journey.
Yeah.
Becoming a king, and he wrote the book. But what about queens, right?
Yeah. So anyways, if we have these two ideas, the hero's journey, which is something that you can look up in on Wikipedia and whatever else. And it's this, like you said, this framework of how do we understand the things that have happened in our lives. Then you have this other piece, which is the stages of maturity, kind of how does a person grow from a baby to an old person. And they meet, and this session that you're going to hear is where these two models meet. And for us, in kind of the training that we do here, we call this place the Crux. It is that middle space that really defines who we think as our target audience for this whole podcast and everything else. It's a phase of life that we've been calling the warrior poet or the knight or something like that. We're kind of fiddling with some terminology here. But it's that notion usually kind of post-education, so that might be college, trade school, whatever, but basically post-education, but royalty, pre-kingdom, right? And so it's that space, usually 20s and 30s, where kind of young families, starting your career, that kind of jazz. But it's also that place of where all of your high hopes, all of your dreams and aspirations from when you're young, they meet the real world. Yeah. And at the real center of that is often from God, is that invitation into something deeper. Are you going to take the easy road, or do you want to go on the narrow path?
Yeah.
And for many folks, understanding that phase of their life is critical, because if you misunderstand what's happening, then you will misinterpret what God's doing. Mm-hmm. And so we compare it, for example, to probably every kind of hero movie you've ever seen. There's usually the training montage,
right?
And training is hard. Training, in fact, its nature is to be hard.
Yeah.
But if we can embrace that hardship and understand its purpose, we get through it and we learn and we grow. But if we reject it, and especially if we're like, oh, if my life's hard, God must be against me, or I'm doing something wrong. Like if we think that training, or I should say, if we think that all difficult things are bad, we'll screw it up.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll dive into that recording, and we'll come back on the other side of that and talk a little bit. I'm already thinking of things that are just coming up in my story, in my mind. It's really helpful. These frameworks, I think, are extremely helpful, not just in this stage of coming into the warrior poet, but really all the stages that we go to in life. So here's Chris, and we'll see you on the other side.
So what we wanted to do today is go through kind of the place where, let me kind of set the stage, which should not be a mystery. We leaned into this first part of the year largely under the whole kind of, there was a survey from Barna, I believe, who was saying something like, now I can't remember the number, it was a big number, like 89% of Christians have no clue why they're here, right? There was sort of like a total gap in terms of calling, mission, purpose, and yet it's one of the most important things that we say all the time in the church. God has a plan for your life, and yet so many folks fail to find it or understand it or anything else. So we started down this road, and just to also contextualize something that you folks will know is we've started to really try to organize where these thoughts go into a purpose instead of just shotgunning random things. And so what we started to do for this first quarter, roughly, is kind of lean into this question of calling and purpose and kind of life choices, that sort of thing. One of the things we did is we brought up the hero's journey as a path in which you can kind of evaluate maybe some ideas about where you are in your life. The others was the stages of maturity. What we're going to talk about today is basically where those two models meet. And so where you might imagine sort of, and I'll go through this for review. So from the hero's journey, if you remember kind of the task we started, which was the invitation. The first step in the hero's journey is this idea that you're suddenly made aware of something that's bigger than yourself. Like the idea like, this could be Luke who suddenly sees that there's this crazy old man in the desert with a lightsaber, and oh my gosh, you knew my dad, and there's all this stuff, right? Suddenly Luke is initiated in something that's bigger than himself. He is shown that there's a world that he knows, and that there's something beyond that he doesn't know. And so a lot of the hero's journey formulations will show this split in the cycle of where you go from the known world to the unknown world and back, or they'll call it different things. But this is the point of the invitation, which moves you into the threshold. The invitation leads to a moment of choice, of which basically you either take it or not, right? And so in many stories that you read, you get both, right? So Luke's first response to the whole invitation is no. And it's later that he kind of gets re-invited and he says yes. Understand that the invitation is always about the choice that you make. And are you going to embrace this, or are you going to go back to what you know? Are you going to play it safe, or are you going to lean into something bigger? That's why it's the hero's journey and not the schmuck's journey. So like this is what makes the difference, is this moment, is the threshold. But the threshold leads to sorrow. The threshold leads to the training. And this is where our worlds meet, is at this piece. And so it's also called the initiation or the training. And in lots and lots of movies, you remember these scenes where it's like it's Rocky doing all his push-ups. It's Batman dragging the weights across the thing. It's Zorro learning from the new master. It's this moment of which the stuff that you didn't have before. And this is also, remember, the invitation of threshold usually comes with a mentor of some sort, or a wizard, right? It's Gandalf, it's Obi-Wan, it's Zorro, it's this old sensei. And it's based on this kind of long stated notion that when the student is ready, the master will appear, right? And so the training is where that guy gets serious, right? And they are going to challenge you. And training is difficult by definition. This is one of the places where people get this wrong, is and you see this in the Bible, where Paul talks about like God disciplines every one of his children that he loves. He does it out of love. And if we misunderstand discipline, if we misunderstand the training, it just looks bitter. It looks hard. And we just think, why isn't the world working? And if you miss what's really happening here, you will often totally miss the lesson, which makes it go longer. So the training is a big piece of the hero's journey, and it's where we're going to focus today. But it leads on to the test. The training is for a purpose. It's not just for fun. Like, you have been called into something for a reason. And so sooner or later, that training has to do something. And often, to be clear, especially in the hero's journey, this is a cyclical pattern. And so there's little cycles inside bigger cycles inside bigger cycles. So understand this that it is fractal in nature. So little bits of training learn into little bits of tests, which grow into bigger tests. The principle you'll see in the Bible is this idea, like, if you are faithful with a little thing, you'll be given a bigger thing, right? Like I gave you 10 minas and you came back with 100, good on you. But clearly he got to 10 minas in the first place. So this idea of being trusted with a little thing that grows into a bigger thing is very much about how the cycle works. I call this the title, this next phase, although we've also called it the battle or other things. But the point is, at the end of this phase is about, you get a new name, a new title, a new something. This could be a sword or a wand. It could just be it could be a job title. It could be a kingdom. It could be a lot of things. But the point is, there is an outward reflection of the inward journey. So this could be the bestowing of knighthood. And so this is where what you've been through, what you've accomplished, is recognized and is put forward on a business card, a plaque, whatever it happens to be. But there's the idea is like it is outward as composed to inward. Which brings us to often the next battle. So if we go from the test, which is can you train a thing, to something that's bigger. They're like, now the stakes are real. The test is a test, right? It's generally lower stakes. The battle it's all on the table. The battle is where all this really went for something. But you go in with authority. And then, of course, the cyclical nature of the hero's journey is to come back to where you started, come back to the known world, usually to bring with you what you learned or what you got. So kind of in classical things, that might be that you came back with the Holy Grail. You went on the quest, you brought the sword, the dragon's head, whatever it was, you bring it back to where you started in order as a boon, as a blessing. And maybe that entire boon is actually internal. You're now a stronger person, and you can lead, you can offer your strength, your wisdom, your grace to the people who need it, who weren't on that journey. There's something worth pointing out as I go through this, is that the nature of this idea of knighthood is cooked into something that a lot of people don't want to face. But I think we see it all the time. It is just the nature of things, that it often falls to a few people to protect the many. And that's also embodied in the principle of not everyone picks the narrow gate. And it is a choice. Knighthood is about picking up a mantle of danger and of risk and of sacrifice that not everybody takes. And so while we say this is available to everyone, it is not everyone's choice. Because all these cases along the way, at the invitation and threshold, I can eject at any point. And frankly, as Jesus says, most people do. So often the difference between whether or not we move forward is this question of inconvenience. And I don't mean to minimize what I mean, because that can be a very big choice, but it's whether or not we're willing to take that step through that veil. That's certainly true a lot in the kingdom. And I would point out also from the kingdom of God, he gives us everything that we need for free. We're all citizens of heaven just by saying yes. But the things that we really want, you got to fight for them. You have to go after them. That's the pursue me. That is the sanctification. That is the go after me and I'll find you. So there are at least two layers in this. There's the free layer, and there's the knighthood layer, which is a choice. So far, so good. You remember all this from the thing? I've got notes if you want them. And then I had a cool graphic because this one has superheroes in it. But it kind of shows the basic example of how this works. It's added some ideas here that I think are fun, including the temptation down here in Act 2, which isn't in the typical formulation. But it points out that in the middle of the training and the calling is always this opportunity to eject, and it's usually through a temptation of our flesh. It's usually to bug out because I'm tired, I need a drink, I just want to get laid, whatever it is. The temptation is to get off the path, and because it's too hard. And so we'll see this a lot in spiritual warfare. The devil loves, if you finally figured out that you've got a sword in your hand, you start to fight back. One of the first things he wants to do is get all up in your grill and look really feisty just to get you to back down. Because if you don't, he loses. But it's scary. And so the temptation, I think, is a really cool add to this. And so then they also kind of have this introduction to the world, but this is if you're telling a story as opposed to sort of living it. So I like the graphic. That brings us back to a quick review of the stages. I'll kind of type through this one. Remember, the first stage is just as you're a kid, is to be the beloved. And if you learn one thing, it's just to know that you're cherished and loved, and that whether that's your parents or whoever's taking care of you, but most importantly, God, that love is at the center of your world. And everything about the world will try to steal that from you. Everything will try to tell you that no, you're not loved. No, he's not really there for you. No, you're whatever. You're a failure. You're too dirty. You're too stupid. You're too fat. Pick your bane. The world will try to steal this from you at every moment. But if this stage doesn't get settled into your heart, then everything that follows will be distorted. Everything that follows will look just harder than it is. It will look meaner than it really is. And it will tend to confirm whatever you learn in this stage. And if you learn that life's hard, everything that comes next will confirm that for you. But if you learn that you're loved, if you learn it right, then everything can confirm that. You can understand what it's all about. That's also where we're going to get here. The second stage we call the cowboy ballerina. And at the end, this is just that the world works a certain way. This is where your awareness of your reality starts to move outside of just my needs into my power. And you start to learn that the world just has no shits to give. Like there's so much stuff that just happens, and you don't have the ability to change how things coulda, shoulda, woulda be. It's a broken world, and even in the places that aren't broken, It just works a certain way. There's gravity, there's wind, there's thermodynamics. Those stuff are just real. They're not moral. They're just the way that the world works. Relationships work a certain way. Your car repairs work a certain way. Learning that this actually happens, and it's not really about you or anybody else, it's just life, is actually a really important part of this phase. And also that you can do something about it. You learn to work. You learn to affect your will upon the world in a positive way. So that's kind of the nature of the Cowboy Ranger phase. That brings us into the poet, and right now we've got to lean these two. At the heart of the poet phase is what we call the aesthetic conversion. It's that awareness that beauty doesn't need a reason. It doesn't need, it is at the heart of God's purpose, and that beauty stands alone as its joy, and it is the reason why we fight. That it is the purpose for which things are good. And by beauty, I mean a really big category of like the good stuff, right? The good, the beautiful, the true, as Plato would put it. I just don't mean prettiness, although that's part of it. I mean like capital B, the good stuff, why we live. It's the sunsets, it's the heart of other human beings. It's the heart of God. And we learn to value that. Now this is tough for men. Frankly, like a lot of men, they're so utilitarian in their nature, beauty gets overshot. And so as a generalization, a lot of women understand this better than men do. And so this is a thing that there has to be learned. And then also there's this great saying I just have to share. The Celts had this great saying that you can't give a man a sword who doesn't know how to dance. That if we do this out of balance, then the next phase, which we call the warrior, just becomes about fighting for fighting's sake. But really the purpose of the purpose of this section is actually to learn what is your great call. This is where we learn, like, what did God make me for? Where's my purpose? And so we've got a whole bunch that we can share on like how we find our calling, what it means. But to know that God has a purpose for your life isn't just a trite little thing we say at church. It is a real thing, it is a real offer, and it comes with real choices. And so knowing this thing will help us navigate the rest of our lives, because if you know that you're a cello and not a horn, you'll make different decisions. And you'll make the right decisions. And so this isn't about really just who we want to be. It's literally about who we were made for. And when you do it just right, you'll find that's the same thing. Oh, let me just quickly close. Remember also that while I separate these two thoughts into, the poet and the warrior, into two ideas, they are really two sides to the same coin in our lives. So like these two things live in tension in the middle of our lives. And that is the balance of the two, of how we navigate this well. A poet without a warrior never gets anything done. And they're the absent-minded artist who never has any purpose in their life. The warrior without the poet is just a ronin, and they are dangerous. That is a samurai without a leader, and they're just dangerous as hell, and they hurt everyone around them because they're only thinking about themselves. So these things go in tandem. Royalty, though, is where it all goes through. Up to this point, we are training for a purpose, and we carried this over in the last Jesus time. So royalty is, how do you rule well? How do you rule well? And we talked at some length about what that looks like, and how kings and queens, who are good or bad, they have an enormous effect on our lives, for good or for bad. And it is a difficult job. So it's easy to say trite things, but it is a hard job. It's a hard job, but yet it is what God asks us to do. Remember, don't you know that you're going to judge angels? Don't you know that you're going to judge the world? These are sobering thoughts that come from the Bible, and it's not an if, it's whether or not you'll do it well. Which brings us lastly to the sage or the oracle. The distinction, what I'm saying, is that the sage being more wisdom, the oracle being more prophecy, but they're the same kind of idea. And this is where you're sowing it back into the generations beneath you. You've learned a lot. You've brought home, so much wisdom, so much grace. You have a bigger window into the kingdom of heaven. And so that's the oracle sage. Okay. Now we're going to step forward into what we're going to call the crux. So this is where these two ideas meet. Although one way, this is probably the wrong picture of it, because it's not that they cross here, it's that they spin off here. So if I have my stages of maturity on a line, in the middle of that is the warrior poet, and sort of the warrior student kind of spins off little curlicues underneath it, right? It's that there's the big circle and concentric circles and all that. That's what's happening in that phase. It's all this learning, all this training, all this initiation. And it'll happen in little ways and big ways. They all come together here. Was that a hand? Okay. This is where our frameworks meet. the initiation of training meets the warrior poet, and I found this super cool magic card that's called the warrior poet. So I just wanted to share that. This word, the warrior poet, comes from Plato, and for him, there was this idea that the perfect citizen, like the ideal citizen, was this person who could blend these two ideas really well, and they made the best kings. So for Plato, that's kind of what he was aiming for. But it's also really pictured in the samurai, who on top of learning how to beat ass with swords and arrows and stuff, they also had to learn calligraphy and flower arrangement and how to do all this stuff that's all about beauty. Because for the samurai, the idea that these two things are actually one and the same, that swordplay is an art form, and it is meant to be beautiful and elegant, and vice versa, that the things that we might call the softer skills, that is a form of warfare. That because it's all about the hearts and the minds. And so you don't win just by killing someone. You win by your strength of character, your Zhang Xin, your ability to formulate the universe into a single person. So for them, it was both the sword and the cherry blossom were the symbols of perfection. And so this idea of the warrior poet goes back a long, long way. It just so happens to include this fuzzy dragon guy, which is cool.
It goes all the way back to the dinosaurs.
Right? It goes back to the dinosaurs.
It's just the truth.
So at the Crux, I want to just kind of pause for a second. We asked these questions before, but it's a way to help orient yourself in this place. So just take a second, just think about these questions. Something comes up, probably write it down. We'll talk about it. I'm just trying to spark something. Okay, with these in mind, I'm going to start talking about what are some principles for this stage, for the stage of I'm going to call it the night, and some lessons. One of the biggest lessons that comes out of this thing is what we call steadfastness. And so in lots of places, you're going to hear persistence, persistence, persistence. This idea of holding fast cannot be overstated. And it is one of the things that right now is super under assault in our current, like people talk about the cancel culture, right? And like all this idea of like, the moment something gets rough, I'm out. That is not how the world works. And that will bear poisonous fruit really fast. I mean, really fast. And you probably can see all that happening. The ability to hang in there with something that's hard. And I want to be super clear. It doesn't mean hang in there with something that's good, something that's being done well. I mean, hanging in there with something that's difficult, even if it's being done poorly. This principle of steadfastness is for your character. It's not a judgment on what you're hanging into. Do you see the stake I'm making? Loyalty, as an example, is not framed in times where your leader is a good leader. Loyalty is framed when things are bad. Because it's really easy to go along with things that are going well. And then you think you're voting with your feet. But there's this other thing, like loyalty is not all about when things are well. Loyalty is a choice about people as opposed to performance. You see the difference I'm making? Persistence to get through a class that the teacher sucks. It's not you have no ability to judge that teacher. What you have is you have the choices that you make in your own heart. Same is true for a president, same is true for a job, same is true for a lot of things. Like the ability to hang in there. Now, I don't say this without that there are boundaries. So I'm not talking about just stupid persistence. That's stubbornness. But steadfastness is that ability to understand that there's more at stake here than just whether or not I agree. There's more at stake than whether or not a certain situation is the way I want it to be. It's about that character of heart that hangs in there when stuff gets rough. And you will be shocked at how often just that ability to hang in there creates victory in your life. Because so many people cancel, so many people eject through things. If you're the last person standing, that's all it takes. And you didn't do anything about it except stick around. That will undoubtedly cause great character in your heart just to happen. And so steadfastness is a huge goal through this stage. The other thing is integrity. Integrity is that thing that says, are you going to do the right thing when no one's looking? When I used to teach in youth group, which wasn't very often, and you'd hear teenagers basically say, well, how much sex can I have before it's really sex, right? Like, how far can I go before I'm in sin, right? But like, where is the line of fornication? And they're asking the wrong question, because what they're asking is, what can I get away with? Like, they're not really seeking integrity and wholeness, which is like, well, where's your heart about this? Like, what are you trying to do here? Is it that, are you trying to get away with sort of like, are you the guy who's kind of fudging the ends of the rules? Or are you something who cares about the spirit of the rules, which is about purity of purpose? And so integrity, I use this quote, don't take the first $5. Integrity is broken in little chunks. When you see someone fall out of, like, you have some big like leader who falls, they didn't just fall. Like, in every case, you find out that integrity had been chipped away little by little, year after year, in all little bites. But little bites become bigger bites become bigger bites. Integrity happens at the core. And when you realize that this is your best shield against a broken world, then you protect your armor. And every little chink, you fix it. And so this question of integrity is so deep. And it is a choice of little patterns. Now, to be clear, this isn't only about moral choices. This is also about intellectual choices. This is about financial choices. This is about relationship choices. This is all about, am I protecting? I think it's the next one. No, it'll be on the next slide. The idea about integrity is about understanding that every little choice really matters, and you protect who you want to be. Not who you are, not who you aren't yet, but who do you want to be? Integrity is the biggest thing, and it happens, that's the little devil on your shoulder, right? Who's always tempting you to do some little compromise, some little whiff off, like, I don't have to do it tonight. And that's going to lead, I think, into the next one, is discipline. Integrity lives and dies on our ability to stick with something into the things that make it hard. So this is often used in spiritual disciplines. It's used in physical disciplines. It's used in the way that we think and take every thought captive. Discipline is that ability to control your flesh, to control your lower beings. And so the way that our body, soul, spirit should work is that the spirit should be in control. That's the part of you that's the most eternal and connected to God. The spirit needs discipline to control the body, to control the mind, to control the emotions. Not that those things are beat into utter submission and destruction, but that they're not in charge. And so it's your flesh that in the morning was like, I'm having a hard day, so I'm going to have a big bowl of ice cream. That's not to say that ice cream's bad. It's like, what are you doing it for? It's your spirit who can say, like, spending time with God every day is actually just really good for my thing. But it's your flesh who says, I want to sleep in another 5 minutes. Discipline is that ability to control our lower selves, and it takes practice. So when Paul says that he crucifies his flesh every day, part of that idea is like, you have to know that this thing always wants what it wants. Your flesh is dominated by immediacy, by comfort, by happiness, and it demands it. It's a little kid. It's a little kid who just wants what it wants right now. Give me my ice cream right now. And it's not a bad thing in that regard, so long as it's under control. So that is the huge lesson of this thing is to be able to control those things so that you're not subject to be blown about by the wind, by the circumstances. It gives you an anchor. We call this a long obedience in a single direction. You'll see that these things kind of build on each other. The persistence is the same kind of question. It's like, we pick a choice, and can we do it in one step at a time for a long time, and that builds character. Foresight is also connected to this, but it looks the other way. Foresight says, like, what am I sowing today that I will reap tomorrow? And am I sowing good seed, or am I sowing bad seed? And so one example of this you probably heard a bunch of times if you ever took a Dave Ramsey class is a little bit of money in an interest-bearing account will be a lot of money, by the time you retire. Like, the power of compound interest is an example of this. Being able to control our finances in little ways has huge benefits later on, but it's also true of your health. It's also true of your habits. It's true of your relationships. Are you picking the friends who are convenient and handy, or are you picking the friends who are going to make you a better person? Are you picking the circumstances that are consistent and useful right now, or are you building towards what you want to be down the road? Foresight is the ability to evaluate those things thoughtfully and meaningfully, and to choose the higher road. So it is so much in us to be trapped in the temporal, to be trapped in the right now, and we make decisions based on that, not thinking about what happens tomorrow. So foresight is a huge skill. It's a hard one though, and it will go into a little bit later. How we learn that is often through the wisdom of our alliances. Loyalty is something that I would highly recommend that happens as the warrior poet in this phase. There's the two kind of ways that this goes. One is the lone soldier. One is the one who is self-motivated, who is looking primarily for their own purposes, their own causes. The other is the person who makes allies, the person who seeks mentorship and who seeks companionship. And so this choice here of loyalty, remember what I said a minute ago, loyalty is about people. It's not about causes. Certainly we can be loyal to causes, but at the heart of it, loyalty all comes down to the people. When Peter runs away from Jesus, it's because his loyalty was fractured. His loyalty became spun up and scared in the moment because what he thought was a cause was actually a person who all of a sudden he doesn't know what's happening. The cause seems to be about it's dying, right? It's going to Herod. It's all that kind of stuff. Peter loses his grip in loyalty. Now he finds it later. But loyalty is that choice about people over circumstances, over purposes, and learning to do this well is sorely missing in our world. Because so much we think about a meritocracy where we judge all things by sort of like how well it performs. And a business or a person or an idea, we tend to evaluate them on metrics that are not about loyalty at all. They're all about performance. They're all about the things that we would hate to be judged on ourselves. And so consider loyalty as a skill that we develop by choice. And it will change the way that you see a lot of things. How you skip churches, how you move between family, how you pick a bride or a husband. Loyalty is a super critical and difficult thing that is not well taught in our society. And I ask this question, who's going to carry your casket? You've probably all seen places who, when they, like somebody who passes away that maybe by earthly standards were important, but their passing is characterized by a lot of bickering, by a bunch of people trying to just get the pieces of the kingdom. You think about Alexander the Great and kind of breaking his kingdom up into 4 places. Alexander had people who were sycophants, but not loyalists. So this question is like, if you died today, who would carry your casket? Have you made the kinds of friends that would be proud to stand up and bear that load? Or would you be hiring professional whalers because there's no one to do it for real? It's a sobering question, but someday it's going to happen to all of us. And so it's worth thinking about the people that we sow ourselves into. And I think lastly is this thing of submission. This is going to be the pivot between whether or not we become warrior poets or whether we become Ronin. The secret to the warrior poet is that they are in service to something bigger to themselves. And everyone serves somebody. Everyone serves something. And so we all have to decide what we are willing to submit ourselves to. And it's easy to say I'm submitted to Jesus. But what Jesus says is that his kingdom is built on layers of other human beings who are set above us. And so that from the beginning, that's our parents, that can be police officers and city officials and everything else. There is a chain of command whether you like it or not. And you can choose kind of like who that is that you will be submitted to, what purposes you'll be submitted to, what ideals. But submission actually is a central piece to this, because if we don't ever learn to submit ourselves, then we can never learn to be leaders, because we are self-directed by ourselves. And if that's the way our hearts work, then we cannot be good kings and queens. So we must practice submission before we can expect it. And so choosing that and understanding it is a huge piece of the warrior poet phase. I think I've said every one of these is a huge piece. So that's because they're huge. And I put in this get wisdom. Wisdom, I would say, is the difference between experience and knowledge. And we can learn wisdom through listening to other people, reading other books, but the truth is most of us need to do this by ourselves. And it's just often because it is our nature as the younger we are to think that we know better. And sometimes we do, but most often there's just information we don't have. And so when the Bible says get wisdom, it treats it as like this is the most important thing that you can do. which we're going to get into. Like it phrases up with the you guard your heart. Wisdom is this thing that we cherish in our heart. It's better than gold, and there's so many places in our lives where our knowledge would teach us would suggest that we go one way, but wisdom would suggest another. Knowing that difference it will save you so much time and money you wouldn't even believe. So, but wisdom can feel really cold when you're a youngster, because often it is the wet blanket. It seems like, oh shit, like I don't want to hear that. But if you start to taste wisdom and what it's worth, it is the sweetest thing you will ever get your hands on. That's a totally mixed metaphor. Now I'm going to lead into a couple principles that we can try to apply to this. Commit to excavation. The nature of this phase is understand that to build a skyscraper that's 100 stories tall, you need to go down. You need to go down to the bedrock. And so when we talk about excavation, this phase in our life is where we start to become aware of the things that have happened to us, how they have affected us, both the good and the bad, the wounds and the boons, and the understanding where our motives are will change everything that's built upon that. I say commit to excavation as opposed to committing to building, because you can't build or you shouldn't build on the sand. You need to build on the bedrock, and you can't get there from the top. If you commit to excavation in your heart, in your motives, in your healing, in your purposes, that will set you up to have an enormously strong foundation that Jesus says about building on stone, building on the rock. But you have to get there by digging into how we see the world. And don't rush this. This takes time. It takes commitment. It takes discipline. But if we commit to excavation, then we know, like, I'm just going to keep digging until God tells me to stop. And you will find that, like, very sweet fruit that very few people find. Shun every shortcut. No matter how much the world says that there is a shortcut to wealth, to fame, to excellence, they are all lies. Every single shortcut that the world offers you is fake. And it always has a cost. It always has strings attached. It always has something bitter on the backside that you didn't see coming. There's always a hitch. But if you make it your principle to shun every shortcut, then you will find that your peers will get ahead of you. Your friends and family are wondering what's taking so damn long. But it will pay off in the ways that you will never doubt. Every shortcut suffers. So I would highly encourage this as a principle. Connected to this is take the lowest seat at the table, like Jesus says. Is like glory is often sort of the currency of our personalities. It's like who's being recognized sooner, faster, who's got whatever, leadership, friends, everything else. But if you take that lowest seat at the table and you let God exalt you, then you know that He says that you're ready, that it's the right time. When we deliberately choose humility, when we deliberately leave things that we could gain for our own glory, when we only pick up those crosses that God asks us to bear, then it allows us to grow at the pace that He has for us, neither too fast nor too slow. But it's a choice for humility. And you will be offered, going back to the hero's journey, you will be offered opportunities to grow beyond your speed. You have to know enough about yourself to know when that happens so that you can say no. It's a critical thing to understand how humility works in the kingdom. And what He says is, like, if you will humble yourself, God will exalt you in due time. And you want that. You want that moment where God says, hey, Zach, you're sitting too low, brother. Come on up to the front of the table in front of everybody. That's what you want. Because now it's not your call. It's not the guy who just sort of like crowds his way to the front of the line. And everyone's like, what are you doing, right? It's another thing when Jesus says, you come to the front of the line. Take my hand. I'm going to show you. I'm going to set a table for you in the midst of your enemies. That's a powerful, powerful moment. Here's something called fierce mastery. And the idea behind fierce mastery is, like, if you're training to be royalty, you need to know what's going on in your kingdom. One of the things that, frankly, as we live in the affluent West, one of the things that's very easy for us to do is we hire stuff out all the time. Now, this let me give you an example. Like, it's easy for us to say, I don't know how to fix the sink, so I'm just going to call the plumber. And it works, right? You get the sink fixed. But as a ruler, consider what it's like to learn to fix a sink. It's not that hard. What this will do is it will give you a tremendous amount of confidence and power just to know that like nothing's beyond you. When Jesus says like all things are capable are possible through Christ, like part of this is taking that challenge at truth. Like, I guess I can do it. Now, it's not to be stupid and try to learn how to build a reactor in your basement, but the truth is like you can get there by steps. Fierce mastery is the principle of learning to take authority where it's given. Like what this is about is understanding that you are given authority in order to exercise that authority. And as you grow into this stage, own it, seize it. And then all this goes back to this, like, so these all build into your heart. And which is to say, sort of from the biblical statement, this is your spirit, this is your soul, this is like, who is you? And know that is what David says, this is the wellspring of all of your life. Guarding your heart is that first starts with an awareness of my heart. Like, what's going on inside me? It's about excavation, it's about wisdom, it's about all that stuff. Like, understand yourself. As Polonius says, right? Knowing yourself. Know thyself is the most important thing. When you know yourself, when you know your calling, when you know your strengths, when you know how God loves you, these things build on something that needs to be preserved because all the outside of this will take it from you. It wants to dilute you. It wants to diminish you. It wants to undermine you. Everything about the world wants to take that heart and make it not work. But this is the center of who you are and what God made you to be. Guard it. When an opportunity comes, like you said, also be aware, like, is this an opportunity to grow or is it just a risk to dilute me, right? We don't take every challenge. The difference between wisdom and knowledge there is like, I can fight that battle, but maybe it's not mine to fight, right? And so there absolutely is an ebb and a flow of discernment and wisdom that has to go into all that stuff. But guard your heart. Guard your heart so it isn't polluted, so it isn't diluted, so it isn't chipped away or put into fragments. Guard it, and it will not only be a fountain of life for you, but when you become a king or a queen, that is the fountain of life for your kingdom. Y'all know the Fisher King story from the King Arthur stories was about this king whose entire physical kingdom was reflected in the status of his own heart, that his own sickness was reflected in his kingdom, which was sagging and broken and everything else. But as he was restored, the physical kingdom was restored. The Fisher King is all about this idea, like, especially when you come to rule, when you have authority, whether that's over a family or a job or a nation, you only can give that kingdom what you have to offer. That's your heart. If your heart's in the trim, then you can give a lot and the people can thrive. If your heart's broken, fragmented, there's nothing left to give. And that's what they get. They get poverty.
All right. So, Chris, after hearing yourself give this talk, what are some of your takeaways? Like, what's your gut reactions after hearing that?
So, for one thing, like, this was our first time. This is a technological, like, kind of a growing up question for ourselves. We'd never recorded any of these, and so it probably what's been cut off, I presume, in the podcast is about 30 minutes of wasted tape, right? Of
Or questions
like, I don't know how this works. How do I turn the mute off? And so it was just funny to hear all that.
Yeah.
And so how much we've learned just in the last several months, that was really interesting. But it also spoke to this whole topic of, are you going to try hard things and are you going to power through and see itself to the fruit? I think that's ultimately the message of the whole thing is, can we embrace difficulty as a positive?
Yeah.
And I think when we look at folks in that young phase, if they don't understand why tough things, it's a game changer.
And words are important. I'm learning this as a dad. So, our kids have been kind of raised up in this idea of Ransom Heart Ministries and, different pastors, different words, different books, Dallas Willard. These terms are really important to us, but I have to be really careful how I use words because words have power and they also have maybe something tied to them that maybe wasn't for me or it was for me, but it wasn't exactly for them. So sometimes using a little word difference is key.
Yeah.
And I think, and even the movies we talk about or the books, I think this, it was funny. I told Natalie in August in the Power Stronghold episode that we did, I purposely chose The Last Airbender, Avatar, the cartoon, and also the Marvel universe to unpack these and put them around the framework of the stronghold of power, because it's more relevant to them.
Right.
So I really like that, and I love how our team is experiencing this brand new. And for us, it's been 20 years we've been talking about these topics.
Yeah.
But to hear them say, "Oh, okay, I see that in my life," and also to add to it little new perspectives that maybe we wouldn't have caught.
Yeah, exactly. How did you feel like we bring up these ideas of there's the lessons, and I don't know if we're going to share the slides or not, but these ideas of like steadfastness and integrity, discipline. It seems to me like when I was in that age, no one set a bar for me. Not myself or anybody else.
Yeah.
Of like, what am I even aiming for? And so I kind of wobbled through life.
Yes.
And maybe I got some good lessons, maybe I didn't, but I didn't have any goals, and like not big goals that were 5-10 years down the road.
Well, it's interesting you talk about that. I'm going through Morgan's new book, Becoming a King, and before you like even dive into some of the meat, he really establishes this idea of sonship, of daughtership, of being a child of God, and how much even having good parents, good mom, good dad, all of us miss out on, because we live in a fallen world, we miss out on the fathering, mothering of God. And that whole idea of coming back and letting God father you, especially, because we believe that there's so much of this that comes from dad. There's tons that comes from mom, but in these stages specifically, there's really these places of initiation, both for men and women, of passing on what needs to come next. And so for me, I'm the same way. I didn't have a lot of that. I had that kind of fractured growing up because my parents were split up, and really I was the youngest of 5 kids, way youngest. My sister Sabrina, who you've heard on the podcast, is the next one up in the line. She's 7 years above me. So I was really kind of an only child, but I was also raised not by wolves, but by my brothers and sisters. And in that, it was kind of, I don't want to say I got like the leftovers, but I did. And so now at 50 even, God is showing me these invitations. And he's also showing me how I was invited up by him, even in the stage of becoming a warrior poet or whatever, any of those stages. And so he was always there doing stuff. I might not have recognized it. And so I'm going through that at 50, this place of saying, I relax into what you're doing for me, God.
Yeah.
What are the missing pieces? Where do I need to be mothered or fathered well?
Yeah. And that reminds me, like the whole thing that we've been talking about, it's not one and done. Like even if you get it right, so to speak, it's not over. Like this idea of growth and maturity, it's cyclical. Like you're going to keep growing, you're going to keep building, and that that's the path of ever increasingness that goes on into eternity.
Well, think of my mother. Hi, Mom, because Mom's a big fan. She loves to listen to these. So, hi, she's 83, and she is God's initiating her into new things, and the difference is that she is willing to have it done.
Right.
And she's saying yes to the invitations, even at 83, going through COVID, being quarantined in her apartment, she can't leave, and new stuff is happening. So that's so refreshing and encouraging to me that this isn't, it's not too late.
Right.
It's never too late.
Very, very cool.
All right. Well, what are some things that maybe our audience could take away as some questions? Well, we're going to make this into a Tempus Divum, but what are some things, Chris, that we could have our audience take away from this, maybe to reflect on, to journal on?
I guess like trying to find if and where sort of where your current life is, especially you can reflect back on pieces of your life to interpret them.
Yeah.
There's questions like what things have gone where your expectation, especially if it was a call from God, that you thought this was going to go slick and easy and fun, and it turned out to be really, really hard.
Yeah.
And how did you interpret that? Did you interpret that as that you got it wrong, or did you see God kind of working with you, fathering you through that? Like look for those moments and see how you've interpreted them, and ask Jesus how he interprets them. Like go there and ask the question. It reminds me of when we can deal with our disappointments with God super honestly, it unlocks a whole world of healing and opportunity. But often we stuff that, right?
Yeah.
And we just want to pretend nothing happens. So I would say that's a big one. I would also say look for those places that you feel behind.
Yeah.
Look for those places where just there's this pressure. It's come from somewhere, maybe from yourself, maybe it's legit. But where do you feel behind?
Right.
And those are huge opportunities to let God come in, walk with you, and again, kind of reorient. Like, what am I actually doing?
Yeah. It's kind of rewiring.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, good. Well, thanks again for listening. Again, if you are enjoying this, we'd love a star review. We'd love a little comment about what it means to you. You can also reach us and see our content on tempusdivum.com. That's where we're posting a lot of these resources, but also resources that we've found really valuable over the years. And we put a little bit of blurb in there, video, that why that's important, as well as some discussion questions. So thanks again, and we will see you next time.